Hi, my name's Mark Stallard, and welcome to Little Green Man, the show that endeavours to prove that Canadian politics is sexy. Well, I got a little pushback on social media in reaction to my video about Ontario increasing minimum wage back in January. There were two main points of contention that were brought up. Arguments that seem rational on the surface, but you don't have to go very deep to see how these points are just myths. The first argument is increasing minimum wage will cause prices to go up, meaning increasing inflation. And the second issue is that businesses will take jobs overseas where the labour is cheap, so businesses can make more profit. Both of these are serious points, and neither should be dismissed out of hand. And in fact, they don't need to be. There is much evidence out there that clearly demonstrates that these arguments are weak at best. Both arguments can be boiled down to this: you can't pay people a living wage because something negative will happen to them or to someone else. And unless I'm mistaken, that's the crux of all arguments against minimum wage. Poor people must be kept poor so everyone else can be comfortable. So if inflation gets too high, you won't be able to afford things, or jobs will get shipped overseas, and blah, blah, blah. Therefore, a large segment of the population must be kept in utter poverty. As long as someone else is suffering, then you won't have to. So keep the poor poor. It is in your best interest. It doesn't sound so noble when I put it like that, does it? Let's dig a little deeper into the first argument, inflation. There is a small element of truth about this one. It's likely that when a business's expenses increase, that wages can be one of those expenses. Prices could go up to compensate. And it wouldn't be surprising that a local economy might notice a blip. But research shows that if there's any change at all in the overall provincial economy, it will be tiny, about 0.1%, as a source in the description. So if inflation held at the universally average 2% per year, it could end up going as high as 2.1%. Now, would you really notice that? Well, here's how much you'd notice that. Let's say a can of beans costs $1 a year ago. With 2% inflation, it will now cost you $1.02. But after a raise in minimum wage, it would be as high as 2.1. That can of beans would cost you $2.02. And 0.1%. A whopping 0.1% more. Now, come on, really? How would you notice, even if inflation went up by 0.5%? The very unstable nature of capitalism, it is likely to go up by that anyway, regardless of a small raise in poor people's wages. I demonstrated in a previous video that an increase of 25 cents per bus ticket could mean an increase of inflation of about 0.8% for someone making minimum wage in Manitoba. So are you okay with a 0.8% raise in inflation for poor people, but opposed to a 0.1% increase for people that can actually afford it? How selfish would that be? How obscene, how completely and totally un-Christian. And further to that, the argument that raising the minimum wage causes inflation also implies that the working poor would be personally responsible for the increase of inflation. Now, what do I have to say to that? Don't you dare blame the poor and the powerless for inflation. Don't you dare. So consider this. Minimum wage wasn't even a thing until the end of the 19th century. That's the late 1800s. Capitalism has been going since at least the 1500s. It started with something called enclosure. It's a precursor to privatization. I'll talk about that in another video. Historical data shows that inflation has been growing at about an average of 2% per year since then. And during the period, there were literal slaves and peasants doing the work. Keeping workers at their poorest did not curb inflation then. So inflation is inherent in the capitalist system. Now, I have a challenge for you. Name one person, just one person, who's not making enough money to live on, who made the decision to increase the prices on products. Name just one person, can you? You take your time, I'll wait. Of course you can't, because that decision is not made by the poor and the powerless. That decision is made by the business owners themselves. It is this blind obsession with making more and more profit. It is inherent in capitalism itself. Profit drives inflation. It is the powerful that raise prices, not the poor and powerless, because the poor literally have no power to change the economy. They literally have no power to change anything, even their own low status. But capitalists do. Now the next argument says, but the poor business person trying to make a living can't compete against mass-produced products being made in other countries that have a much lower minimum wage, or no minimum wage. That's really a joke of an argument. If that situation offends you, then why are you patronizing companies that use virtual slave labor? I mean, examine yourself, examine your own purchasing behavior. It's obvious to both sides, working people who claim to be on the left and working people who claim to be on the right, that the problem is with Canada abdicating control of its own resources, not producing products but selling resources off cheap to other nations, then buying them back. The resource is now refined and packaged with a massive profit on the top for the rich investors. Now, the self-identifying right will blame Trudeau for the deals with China, and they're right to do so. But the solution must not be to sit back and play the game that Trudeau took over from Harper. Oh yes, Stephen Harper was no better. He was the biggest cheerleader for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a horrifying pro-corporate neoliberal giveaway to corporations and the rich people that own them. Harper even lauded the TPP, saying it would be in Canada's best interests. Wait a second, isn't that what the exact phrase that Justin Trudeau is using to justify the Kinder Morgan pipeline? Selling off natural resources on the cheap? But I digress. The idea that free trade agreements are wonderful for us, like NAFTA and the still future TPP, yes, it's still a threat, was and is a bald-faced lie from both Stephen Harper and Justin Trudeau. This isn't a Liberal versus Conservative issue. They're in it together. Both parties are in it together. Now, as far as neoliberalism is concerned, my definition of which is corporations doing what they want, when they want, to whom they want, with impunity. The federal Liberals and the Conservatives are two peas in a pod. Our leaders, for the past 40 years, are to blame for dragging our country to the far right. And what is at the far right that is so urgent that we get there so quickly? Well, the far right is where the pockets and the coffers of corporations and the rich people that own them just happen to reside. So looking at the underlying argument, we must not measure a minimum wage because the poor businessman might take their jobs outside of Canada. In other words, don't change anything. But minimum wage has been getting worse right across North America for decades. Corporations and the rich people that own them still move jobs overseas anyway. They don't care. They've been doing it all along, and they will continue to do it, dragging down the Canadian standard of living for all of us as they get richer. So if you truly think the current situation is wrong, and if you're a human you should, then take action to change it. Don't let your representatives and or party of choice get away with pushing these destructive neoliberal policies. Instead, insist that they change or threaten to vote for someone else. Make them understand that you are serious. And to you, I say, Goyagi, get off your arse and get involved. It's up to you to make change happen. The solution starts with putting people first. Anything less would literally be inhuman. Little Green Man. This is the back door to the Manitoba legislature. Now, if you hit the subscribe button now, hit the notification bell, then you won't be surprised when they try to stick something up your back door.